right, so welcome. My name is Laurel Huston. I am the founder of Reflections Inside and Out and the creator of Body Mapping. Reflections Inside and Out as a company, our goal is to help women love who they are inside and out. And body mapping is one of the ways that we do this. So, for those of you who are new, say hi, introduce yourself in the group, and quick review what body mapping is. Body mapping is anatomy, physiology, body language, energy, and all of this compiled together to basically teach you that you look the way you look for a reason. And those characteristics are the literal map that our creator, that God put on you to help you know who you are, know your purpose. And today I want to talk about learning styles and communication styles, because this is something that the biggest problem with communication is that we assume it actually occurred. So for those of you who talk to your kids, talk to your coworkers, talk to your spouse, and you feel unheard, or you go, why are you doing that? I just told you not to do that, and you're not understanding why certain things are happening. I want to shed some light on that because we all have primary learning styles. And the other reason I kind of felt like I wanted to share this information was because a lot of people are going back to school. And as much effort as teachers put into trying to get all of those learning styles in, if you understand the way that your child learns, then that is the way you can tutor them and teach them and encourage them at home. And so, first, I'm just going to assume that you know nothing about what I'm talking about, because that way I can get down to the basics. So, first, what are learning styles? So, everyone has a preferred method of learning, and that can be visually, that can be auditorily, or that can be through movement. And there are more than those, but I'm trying to keep this simple because I try to keep these videos to around 20 minutes. So the three main styles are seeing, hearing, or doing. And so a lot of teachers, when they teach, they try to show you, tell you, and then interact and have you do it with them. That's a pretty classic learning style. But all of you who are on this should be over 18, which means you should have been through some kind of schooling, which means you have learned to use the other learning styles, even if they're not the one that you prefer. So the reason that I'm talking about learning styles in the same video as communication styles is that because most of us are still learning how to communicate, we actually communicate with people in the way we want to be communicated with. We teach other people the way we want to be taught. And so if you can identify this with your own children and with yourself, you actually accelerate the communication process and you actually accelerate the learning process as well. So this came to me because I homeschool my kids, and I teach each one of them very differently because they have very different learning styles, and I have the luxury of being able to do that. We started homeschooling not because the world fell apart, but because I travel a lot, and my kids have been able to do some really cool experiences and go fun places with me because we have the freedom to do that. So this was something important to me because if I could teach them in the way that they learned the fastest, then I didn't have to spend as much time teaching them. I'm kind of lazy that way. So here is what this is. Hey Taylor. So you have your eyes would be an auditory learner, ears would be eyes would be a visual learner, ears would be an auditory learner, and kinesthetic learner are people who need the physical contact. So in body mapping, because body mapping is based on your measurements, when you measure your body or your child's body or your coworker's body, you can actually, by looking at them, know their best way of communication. So I say this, and every single time I always have someone who says, that doesn't fit me. That's because we have programming. That's because whether you went to public school or whatever, you have had to learn how to use the other learning styles. My primary learning style is visual. If I can watch you do something, I can replicate it. If I read something in a book, I can regurgitate that information for years to come. If you verbally tell me that, I get some of it, but I need you to repeat it 2 or 3 times. And so I can learn by hearing, I can learn by doing it along with you. But if I can watch you and do it along with you, I pick it up really quickly. If I can't see you and I'm just getting verbal instructions and I have to do it while you're giving me verbal instructions, it's a really hard process for me. Where other people want that. They're like, stop showing me pictures. Death by PowerPoint is not how to teach me. Just stand there and give me information. Where other people are like, I need the notebook. I need the notebook. So this is the measurement for that. First, I always tell people, start with the measurement of the eye. So if you take your thumb and you bend from the tip of your thumb to the edge, your knuckle is your eye. So when I measure, you poke yourself in the eye and you come across. And my eye is actually large for my face. And so my eye comes past my knuckle right here. That is how I know visually that I am a visual learner. Whether I have makeup on or not, when you look at my face, you're like, yes, she has large eyes. So don't overthink this, because there are some people that they're like, I don't know what I am. And that's why I have you measure. So if you have, when you measure, if your if your eye comes before your knuckle, your eyes would be considered proportionately small. If the corner of your eye hits the middle of your knuckle, your eye would be considered proportionate. So just keep that in mind for a minute. So if your eye is large, you are most likely a visual learner. You literally see better, more details, more vivid colors, more than someone who has proportionate or small eyes. Makes sense, right? So your ears. Another way to see if your eyes or if your ears are large, if you go from the bend of your nose, so that would also be with the corner of your eye right here. So from the bend of your nose to the tip, that should match where your ears attach to your head. So it attaches here and then it attaches down here at the bottom. So from the top of your ear to the bottom of your ear, where it attaches. So this up here doesn't count. Where it attaches here, is also the size of your nose, okay? So if you measure and you're like, I have big ears, you don't usually have to tell people that they have big ears. Most people that have large ears have known it their whole life, but I still want you to measure, because sometimes people who think they have big ears don't actually have big ears. They just have ears that are forward. And so, okay, so Taylor, if both your ears and your eyes are bigger, you probably actually just have small hands. So we'll get to that in just a second. So for me, my ears are proportionate, but my eyes are large. So that means I am a visual learner. With Taylor, her eyes are big and her ears are big, so there's not a feature that outweighs the other feature. So if you have someone that has proportionate eyes and large ears, they would be auditory. You can have people that have small eyes and proportionate ears, which means their ears are still bigger than their eyes. So that is, if there is one that is bigger than the other, then that's your predominant one. So for the majority of people, you will actually learn that either your eyes are big and your ears are big, or your eyes are small and your ears are small. So there's not one, or they're both proportionate. So you actually go into the third category. And so when you go into the third category, it's kinesthetic. And what that means is that you can learn by seeing, you can learn by hearing, but when you learn best is when you have the ability to move. So when you measure, if your eyes are proportionate and your ears are proportionate, or they're both small or they're both big, you don't have one that's bigger or smaller than the other, you fall into kinesthetic or tactile. The thing with kinesthetic and tactile learners, they both learn through movement or texture. And the reason why this is important, if you are someone who is a kinesthetic or tactile learner, In school, you will be labeled as mischievous or rambunctious or ADHD because you can't hold still. The reality of it is, kinesthetic and tactile learners, the more stimulated they become, the faster they process information. And so, like, kinesthetic learners will sit and click a pen. And if they're sitting next to an auditory person, they're going to get punched because the auditory person is having a really hard time learning because all they hear is the clicky pen, and it's very distracting to them. So a lot of times kinesthetic learners don't even realize that they're fidgeting. Okay? They're the people that if they don't have a clicky pen, they'll like take the lid off and put the lid back on. Take the lid off, put the lid back on. They'll drum on their desk. Or if they don't have access to anything in their hands, they'll sit on their foot and then a few minutes later they'll switch feet. But they're constantly moving. Or yeah, they'll click on their desk. But the whole thing with kinesthetic is movement and tactile is touch. So they'll take a pen and they'll sit and rub on it. And tactile people are very picky about the clothing they wear because if they get over or understimulated by the clothes they wear, they can't concentrate. So if you have a child that puts on 5 different outfits before they can leave in the morning, look, because if their eyes and their ears are the same size, like one isn't bigger than the other, then they fall into the kinesthetic or tactile category. And if their clothes overstimulate them, it makes it hard for them to concentrate. And so you'll offer them an outfit and the first thing they do is touch it. And they'll either say, no, I don't want to wear that. Honor that. Yeah, Abigail, I hate tags. Yes, tactile people hate tags because it's the only part about their shirt they can feel is the tag that's in the back. And so kinesthetic and tactile people often get mislabeled when really what it is that their body is trying to help them learn by moving, by sensing, because kinesthetic and tactile people actually hold information in their body throughout the day. With kinesthetic people, the more they can move, the more they can fidget, the faster they process information. So if you're talking with someone who's kinesthetic and you say, just hold still, so they hold still. And then you ask them a question, they'll go, I don't know. And then you'll say, how do you not know? Answer the question. And they'll start to sway or move or their eyes will wander. And you'll go, focus, answer my question. And they'll go, I don't know. They're trying to answer your question. That's why they're moving. That's why they're fidgeting, because it's in their body, not in their head. And they have to move in order to find it. Okay? Let's see, my eyes are definitely bigger than the thumb measurement. Yeah, but I'm also one who is constantly moving and touching. So this is where, as I said before, you can have a primary learning style, like visual, Talisha, but if no one ever allowed you to learn in that way, you will have another. I was never allowed to just sit in a room silently and watch someone do something and then regurgitate it. I always had to filter out noise. I always had to filter out people touching me and bumping up against me. And so for me, I would love to just sit and watch. Like silent movies for me, I could totally do that because it's all the visual. I hear a sign, I read a fact, it's in here for good. As long as no one's touching me and it's silent, because I have to filter out other information. So I had to learn how to still function and learn while people touched me, while there was noise around me. And so that is something that, and I'm not blaming teachers for this. I'm not even blaming the educational system for this. It is hard for a teacher to say, okay, all my visual learners come over here and you guys are just going to look at this diagram and figure it out, because they could. And you're going to go over here and say, okay, all my auditory kids, I'm going to lecture to you. And all my kinesthetic and tactile people, you all come together and you poke and you prod at each other and you put together these Legos and you just figure it out. Like, we don't have the capacity to do that right now. Yeah, I was hooked on a Korean show that only had subtitles, right? Because it was so stimulating to you because you could block out the sound and you had the picture and you had the words and it was so engaging. So, where someone who's auditory is like, subtitles? Are you kidding? And they can't do it. Um, so how this all comes into play and what this all looks like is that I'm going to use Taylor as an example because or sorry, not Taylor. I think it was Abigail. Is very her eyes and ears, neither they're both large. She's very kinesthetic. It's all about touch. It's all about movement. So a lot of people are like, I'm not sure what I am. Well, how often do you turn yourself upside down? Because kinesthetic and tactile learners, because they hold information in their body, in order to fully process it, sometime throughout the day, they will turn themselves upside down. They'll lay on a couch and lean their head off the couch. They'll slouch in a chair and make their head go backwards. They'll do yoga. Little kids will go do cartwheels or somersaults. They'll swing on a swing and put their feet up in the air. They have to do something that forces what they've held in their body to go into their head, and then they process it. So here's what's hard and why a lot of kinesthetic learners don't want to claim that they're kinesthetic. Because somewhere we've developed this stereotype that if you can't sit still and learn, you're stupid. Or if you have to work with your hands, that you can't just that if you aren't just a book study person, that you have to touch and feel and do things to learn, that somewhere that's a bad thing. But here's the reality of the situation. A kinesthetic learner who is allowed to move, or a tactile learner who is allowed to feel, processes information faster than audio or visual learners. Because they have their entire body to help them process that information, not just their head. So here's what that looks like in a real life example. If you have a grocery list and you hand it to a visual person, they will look at that grocery list and they will check mark everything as they go through that grocery list. And they will come home and they will hand you a check marked, crossed off grocery list, and everything that was on the list will have been purchased. But if while they were going out the door, you said, and don't forget to get spaghetti sauce, what will they not come home with? Spaghetti sauce, because it wasn't on the list. They didn't visually have a stimuli to help with that. Reverse that to an audio person. They will come home with spaghetti sauce and you will say, where's the rest of the list? And they'll go, well, I lost it, but here's your spaghetti sauce. Because that is what they heard. So that's what they remembered to get you. And if you talked about anything that was on the list, if you're like, make sure you get 1% instead of 2% milk, they'll come home with the right milk, but they probably would have lost the list. A kinesthetic person will take the list to the grocery store, and by the time they return home from the grocery store, the list, if it is still readable, will either be like curled up in a ball or it'll be crumpled up because it was in their pocket. But the list would have been highly felt through the entire grocery store. And there would probably be some extra things in the cart that stimulated them and got them to be like, ooh, I want that. Okay, they shop by stimulation. So how does this come across in communication? Oh, wait, there's a really long, give me just a second to read. So if I'm a tactile learner and then significant other is holding my hand and caressing it with his thumb while they are listening and while I'm trying to focus too, and if that drives me crazy simply because it's distracting me and I can't focus, then is that just me or is that okay, hold on, that is a typo. A thing, not a gorging. Okay. Or is that not a thing? So that is more of an intimacy thing, because if they're rubbing the back of your hand, so this part of your hand is intimate and this part of your hand is work. So if you are not feeling an intimate connection to this person, them rubbing an intimate part of your body is going to drive you crazy. It could also be overstimulation, where you're like, oh, that's too much, I can't concentrate. But yes, so there's sometimes people ask questions and then I answer them honestly and they're like, I probably should not have asked that question. But to me, that is more of a, I'm not so sure about the intimate connection with this person, and that's why it could be irritating you. Or you're feeling like it is not appropriate for you to be doing this right now. I still need to go home and measure to see for sure if I'm tactile learner, but I am just curious because I think I might be. If you have never looked at your face or your ears and thought, I think that's bigger than it should be, you're most likely kinesthetic. It is actually the most common. And that's what's so interesting about that, is that the majority of people have quite proportionate features. And so because you have the majority of people who have proportionate features, it is the learning style that is least used. And so kinesthetic learners are going to want to touch you while they talk to you. They won't hold you. They'll kind of like push you, or they'll like grab you and shake you. Where tactile people will hold on to you and they're like, mess with your shirt, or yeah, they'll rub your arm while they talk to you. Or they'll like play with their own clothes. Like I have one of my sons is always pulling on his collar. And so we can't pass on any of his shirts to his little brother because all his collars are stretched to crap. But the reason why this is important for me, especially where I homeschool, my older son that's very tactile, I always give him physical things to do. He's cutting, he's using crayons instead of pencils. Because he likes the texture of, he doesn't like the texture of the wrapper, so all of his crayons are wrapperless, but he likes the feel of just the waxy crayon. So he will do pages of math with a wrapless crayon, but if I hand him a pencil, he's like, oh. And it's not the subject, it's not math, it's that it's not the right stimulation for him to want to touch it. So kinesthetic people are like pokers, pushers, grabbers, teasers. Tactile people are going to hold and pet, like kids that pet you. Visual people they're the ones that like stare you down. They're very intense when they talk to you. And part of you, you're like, are you like looking into my soul? What is it? They're very good with eye contact. Where audio people are the exact opposite. They're actually going to stare off into space because they're going to find a point that doesn't distract them so they can put all their energy and effort into listening. And they're going to stare past you, because if they stare at you, then they're going to find themselves like overanalyzing your face and they're not going to listen to what you say. So if you look at someone that has large ears and they are staring past you, trust that they are actually listening to you. They're actually trying to listen to you very intensely. And that's why they're not looking at you, because every time you move and your facial features and every time you do something different, they're like, oh, wait, now I have to analyze that. And it's too much for them. Where a visual person is like, I see what you're not saying. So they're going to be the person that wants a deeper conversation, because they're like, well, you said yes, but you said yes like this. Yeah. And they're like, oh, she doesn't really mean yes. And so there are things that say yes. My sister pokes at me all the time and grabs me when she wants to talk. Yeah. It drives me up the wall. I'm laying on my bed listening and fidgeting on my legs. Yep. This is really interesting when thinking about my kiddos. Yes, and that's why I'm doing this right now, because whether you are homeschooling your kids or not, if you can look at your child and be like, oh my gosh, you have huge ears. Stop doing the problem in front of them and saying, this is how you do this math problem, and making them watch you. Give them step-by-step audio instructions while they do the problem. Where a visual person, you would say, okay, watch how I do this. Now tell me back what you saw. With a kinesthetic person, you would do it together. Figure this out with me. Here's your pencil, here's your crayon, here's your piece of paper, here's mine. We're going to write this down together. And you're going to move back and forth, and I'm going to breathe through it, because every time you knock into me, I'm going to remind myself I'm being a patient, loving mother right now. Okay. What's the difference between petting and grabbing? So tactile people are going to want to continue the motion, where kinesthetic people are going to be more of like, sorry, if I'm kinesthetic too, then wouldn't that be the same language? And I would like that. Well, because kinesthetic and tactile are slightly different. But no, if you are tactile or kinesthetic, that's how you like to communicate, but you can be overstimulated by another kinesthetic person. And so actually, some really good combinations are if you have one party that's kinesthetic or tactile and the other that is either just audio or just visual, because then they're not competing for textures or movement. So for me, visual, when people move around a lot, there's so much for me to look at that it's almost overstimulating for me. So if I know that you are a kinesthetic person, I will touch you. And now you will hold still while I talk to you, because there's a connection there. Or if you're tactile, I'll hold your hand and I'll let you rub my hand. But because I know that they need to move and shift and do whatever, I will, because I get very distracted by all the movement, especially hand talkers that are not aware of their body language. And so that is something that for me, because I know you will listen to me better if I touch you. So like my son, if I really want him to listen, I touch his cheeks. And I don't make him look at me. I just touch his cheeks. Or I'll tickle his neck while I talk to him. And then he's not doing it to me, because for me, it doesn't help me. It distracts me. My husband is kinesthetic, so he's always wanting to touch me. It's not because he's a man and he can't keep his hands to himself. It's because that is his way of saying, I'm really paying attention to you. So just because you are that person doesn't mean you want to be touched. It means you want to do the touching. It means you want to control the texture. It means you want to be the one. I'm a visual for sure, so show me. And Taylor, that's why you're so good with branding. That's why you understand tone and color and spatial reasoning and all of those things, because you literally have an eye for it. This is where some of expressions come from, because people who have an eye for it generally have large eyes and they can visually see what works. Photographers that have large eyes tend to be better photographers than people who have large ears, because they see it. Where musicians that have large ears tend to be those who can hear a piece of music and figure out how to mimic it. Where visual musicians need to be able to watch. They need the music. Where audio people are like, oh yes, I've got this. Where kinesthetic people just kind of make it up as they go, because they're like, this just feels right. Like it's all about how it makes them feel. So when you are communicating with people, if you see that someone has very large eyes, they're the person you're going to draw a diagram for. Where if they have very large ears, you're going to do your very best to hold still and speak clearly, because that is what will help them process information the most. Where if you are kinesthetic, you're not going to tell them, or you see that you're talking to someone who's kinesthetic, you're not going to tell them to hold still. You're not going to tell them to look at you. You're going to let them move and do whatever, and you're going to say, are you listening? Because with my son, when I say, are you listening? Tell me what you just heard me say. He can regurgitate everything I just said to him as long as I allow him to move. Now, is that ideal for public school? No. But I'm talking about after school, when you're working with your kids one on one, when you're trying to communicate with your coworkers or you're training people who work for you, and you're like, why are you not getting this? Because if you're a visual learner, you're giving them charts to read, and they're an audio learner, and they're like, please give me verbal instructions. I promise I'm not an idiot. I just need to hear it. So when audio learners are not given the opportunity to hear it, they they are these people. Thank you for your I hope that they are plants and stimulate and a helpful source of and they will read out loud to themselves without realizing. But if they can hear it, they'll process the information faster. And this is something that I love to teach people when it comes to personal development, because there are certain personal development tools that work better for certain learning and communication styles. Declarations for me to say out loud, not that helpful, but if I read them, they're very helpful. My brain processes those quickly. My son that has large ears and is an audio learner, vision boards are very hard for him because he has to stare at them. But declarations or talking about what he wants, actually like daydreaming and speaking out loud, that really works for him to manifest. Where my child that's kinesthetic, we like go to the store and I let him touch and feel and actually like immerse himself into the experience, and personal development works better for him that way. And so there's so much more to this, obviously, but I hope that this is something that you can be like, okay, who am I communicating with that I can communicate better? And it's so all you have to do is look. And if when you're looking, you're like, everything looks the same, then they're probably kinesthetic or tactile. And now that you understand what that is, you'll recognize it quite quickly. Quite quickly. When someone has large eyes, you can usually tell, you're like, yeah, they have big eyes. And when someone has large ears, they don't usually need to be told. They usually know. But this is something that I hope is helpful to you, that you can start putting into practice, that when you're talking with your children, with your spouse, that you can be like, okay, I need to remember this, because I'm a visual learner, and so I tend to teach in a visual way. I always make sure I have handouts. There's always a PowerPoint. That's another thing. When I'm teaching and I'm doing large presentations, if I see someone in my audience with their eyes closed, but I can see that they have big ears, I'm like, oh, they're still fully engaged. They're not asleep. They're just blocking out all of the other stimuli so that they can get the content. Where my visual learners, they want the workbook, they want the PowerPoint, they're taking ridiculous amounts of notes that they're going to go back and read later. Audio people will really only take notes when it's socially required for them to take notes, but it's like bits and pieces. They're bullet point note takers. Where kinesthetic people have learned that taking notes is a socially acceptable way to move their muscle. But if you actually look at the notes, the majority of the notes are just them doodling. Like all of the O's are now smiley faces or flowers. Every circle has been colored in. They're very much, I'm going to move because I'm going to write because I don't get in trouble for writing, but I need to move. If I can doodle, I can remember. So kinesthetic has almost 2 subcategories within it: tactile, like touching or feeling, and movement. Yes, that is correct. Absolutely correct. So, and when I first started teaching them, I blended it all together and I was like, no, kinesthetic is a very different than tactile, because tactile people don't necessarily need to move a lot, but they need to like the textures that are around them. I bullet point notes all the time, right? So this is why I teach this, is because it's one of the things that people very quickly are like, oh, that makes so much sense. And now you can actually have better communication and a better understanding of yourself and of other people. So I hope this was helpful. I had a couple people I posted a little teaser. Registration for my live October event is going to open later today. And for those of you who do not know about that, in October, I will actually be teaching body mapping live over a 2-day course. And I will have one of my dearest friends, Allison Chavez, will be there, and she will be talking about money and feminine energy. I will be talking about body mapping and how learning body mapping helps you get into the divine feminine energy and how to really love and honor and understand your body. And I will also have another speaker there who will be talking about movement and how certain movements get you into feminine energy. So that will be coming up later today, but I wanted to make sure I got you this information with school starting, with all these other communication things happening. So you'll probably have more questions. I hope I answered most of them with this, and good luck with school starting and in your relationships, and I love you.